Hey now, welcome to 106 of the Batman on Film podcast. BOF is a sponsor as well as a proud member of the Batman Podcast Network. In addition to the Batman on Film show, you can find, Justin, you were telling me something off mic earlier. What was it?
Oh, you can find the it's the Batman Universe.
Batman Universe, yeah, that was it.
Batman Universe, where everybody loves a Drake, and they're part of all of those shows. But yeah, they have a whole bunch of Batman podcasts, and you should check them out. And they have their Batman Universe specific one where they just cover everything Batman. So it's a good show. So you should definitely check it out.
So check out all those fine shows at BatmanPodcastNetwork.com. I'm your host for today's show, Rick Shew, and here with me is my co-host, partner in crime. What is your name again? I always forget. Are you Ryan Haas?
No, this is Justin Kowalski. I don't know who Ryan Haas is.
No, we don't know who Ryan Haas is. That's right. Bill Ramey is not here either, which means it's going to be a good show, right? All right. And returning once again. Returning once again is our friend and pal, Huffington Post film critic, Zaki Hasan. Good morning, Zaki.
Howdy.
All right. Lastly, I'm very excited to have this gentleman on. We have been talking for months about doing a show together. One of the biggest Superman fans I've ever come across from Comic Book Debate, Superman superfan, Sheraz Farooqi. Sheraz, good morning, sir.
Good morning. Glad to be here, guys.
Awesome. Likewise, man. And as always, Batman on Film is the authoritative, the definitive, and give me a Southern California. Come on, do it, Justin.
Dadgum original.
Yeah, Dadgum original. All right, whatever. All right,
not very California, but that's just how it is. You can't say Dadgum and not sound like you're from Mesquite, Texas. There you go, Rich.
That's right. It's hard. I've never said Dadgum in my life until Bill made me start saying it for Batman on Film. Anyway, so all right, guys. So today we're launching one of many Superman-centric shows. I know that I can say for myself that he's my number 2 favorite of all time, second only to Batman. Sheraz, I know he's your number 1, correct?
Correct. Superman is something that has been with me since the day I was born, so it's a very important character to me.
That's amazing. And Zaki, he's your number 1 as well?
Oh, no question.
No question. And Justin, he's where for you?
He's neck and neck. It's like an Oreo cookie of heroes. So it goes with Batman. I don't know what the white creamy filling is, but it is definitely those two together.
Okay, cool. Weird analogy. So we're going to move on from that anyways. So anyway, guys, so what I thought, there's a billion different ways that we could talk about Superman. It's endless. Comics, animation, television, what have you. What I thought we would focus on today, we're titling the show Superman in Cinema. I want to talk specifically about the major motion pictures that started with 1978's Superman the movie all the way through Justice League. So let's start with what launched this entire conversation, so to speak. And what I think is more or less the grandfather of superhero films to begin with is 1978's Superman, the movie. Does everybody agree here? I know that Batman 89 certainly has its place in sort of the catalyst for modern day comic book films. But in terms of where it really started, I mean, without Richard Donner's Superman, the movie, we wouldn't even be here talking about any of these things that we love, right? In terms of comic book heroes on film. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, no doubt.
Definitely.
Yeah. For sure. Okay, so listen, Sheraz, I'm going to start with you. When's the first time you saw the original Superman film? Can you remember?
The exact date I probably cannot remember because I was really young. But again, it's worth noting that this film did come out 16 years before I was born. So basically, my mother was a huge fan of the character. And when she introduced the film to me, I was so young, but it's so impressionable because a film like this, I think no matter where you are or where you're from, it has that impact on you. So definitely, maybe I saw it when I was 3, 4. But the second I saw it, my love for Superman started, and it's never subsided since.
So is it fair to say then that Superman the movie is what made you fall in love with Superman in the first place? Is that what you're implying?
Well, it's a big part of it. I think it's that and a combination of Superman the animated series, which was right around the time I was born. It started in 1996. So that was also part of it. So those two combined really made the start.
Okay, cool, man. And how do you feel about the film today? Like when you reflect back on it, how does it age for you?
I mean, actually, it aged beautifully. In a sense, it aged even better because as I've grown up and read countless comics and as I study the history of this character, I just appreciate this film more and more every day. And to me, honestly, it's an unequivocal masterpiece in comic book movies. So I only appreciate it more every day.
Yeah, I do too, man. I think we'll get to me in a moment, but I think it has grown to, I've never tired of this movie ever. Zaki, where were you the first time you saw it?
Well, I was born in '79, so I was born right in the middle of both this and Superman 2, because Superman 2 was 80, I think, right?
Yeah.
So I to me, the two of them are linked, and I feel like that was the best time because my brother was 5 years older than me, so he was super into it. So very similar to Star Wars, where I kind of through osmosis through my brother, I was exposed to what I consider, the definitive screen version of Superman. And my mom tells me that when I was a kid, I would see the Superman symbol and I would say na na na. Like that was what I called Superman because na na na, and I mean it started there, and about 6 or 7 years later was when the John Byrne reboot happened, which is when I started reading the comics, and I never stopped. So for 20 years from 87 to 97, just about, I read Superman comics. And so to me, it's this linkage. It's this combination of Chris Reeve being what I consider the definitive version of the character on screen, and then John Byrne drawing what felt to me like the Christopher Reeve version in the comics. And that's what got it started for me. That's
awesome. And how does the film age for you now?
Man, you know what? I watch it all the time. I was just watching it yesterday. And it's one of those flicks I can just always put on. I can always put on the scene where Jonathan Kent dies. I can always put on the scene where when Superman makes his debut outside the Daily Planet. There are aspects of it that are dated or that don't make any sense or whatever, but just in toto, it holds together so well. And it goes to Richard Donner, his marching order being one word, verisimilitude. And that made all the difference. I mean, he approached it completely straight. He said, I'm not going to wink at this. I'm not going to laugh at it. I'm going to treat this as what it is, American mythology. And you talk about setting the temperature for everything that came after in the genre. It was because Richard Donner was willing to play it straight.
He absolutely did. And when I think back on that film now, when I watch it, yeah, it's dated in some moments, particularly the fashion, because it was the 1970s. And right, it's like the tackiest decade ever for clothes. But outside of that, as far as just a human story and how it touches me and the performances and the score, I mean, it's still so good. And I'm going to say that because I'm going to segue to someone that I don't think feels the same about this as all we all do. So Justin, let's just get this out of the way. So tell us when did you see Superman the movie? How did it impact you, and how do you feel about it now?
I think the first time I saw it must have been on TV. It had to be a TV airing where in the 80s, everything was a big event, like, the world premiere of Superman on television. But I remember us watching it then. And as a kid, loved it. I think that it captures your imagination. And there's something about seeing, Superman flying and it's real. And it becomes, one of the reasons you start tying, towels around your neck and all that type of stuff. But it wasn't my first interaction with Superman, though. My first Superman was George Reeves. Wow. And, that was my first Superman. And so I think when I go back and I think about my first experience, it's him. And it's that guy who shows up, busts through the wall, takes somebody's gun, bends it, and is like going to give them a knock on the jaw, where Reeves, it was a little more like, hey guys, shaking his finger. And as I look back, I feel that the Reeves interpretation has kind of spoiled what Superman is in, I think, the public's perception of him. I don't know if does that make sense? I think everyone kind of thinks of this super, super, the big blue Boy Scout, which they call him, but, and not that that's bad, but I think that I feel like it's in this, it's made it very, very saccharine. I don't know if that's the right word, where it's kind of hard to bring that. It's hard to bring that character forward into a modern into a modern world, which I think they did do it well, but then you get people that just push back against it all the time. So sorry, I didn't mean to really get into this yet, but that's where my brain goes. I really like parts of Superman the movie. I really do. I mean, when he first shows up, like you're talking about, Zaki, like when he first shows up and he's out on the street and then he catches the helicopter and saves Lois, all that stuff's great. Some of the Krypton stuff used to bore me. Now I kind of like it. I even love the references. They still put a reference into it with the rings, like as they're in holding in the current comics right now with Lonely Place of Living. They had like Tim Drake like trapped in the like the Phantom Zone looking like rings. And so some of it's just part of our geek culture, you know, like we go back to it and like, oh, that was from Superman. But overall, when I look back at it, there is some of it that's just really hard for me to not look at it and be critical. And that just, and it might be, and I think it's because of the George Reeves Superman. I think I go back to the guy the no nonsense Superman is what I think I'm used to.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
No.
Yeah. And I don't want to say, and I don't think the Reeves Superman is a terrible, I mean, on Twitter and stuff, when you're talking and you're starting to, you know, you're ribbing, you know, you're doing like, it's always the locker room. Like, oh yeah, that's the worst thing. Yeah. It's not. And he is probably the best Superman. But for me, I think I always gauge it through my first experience, and that's George Reeves.
Sheraz, what do you think of that juxtaposition of, you know, I know this is Superman in cinema, but it's still relevant to talking about Chris Reeve.
Hey, Superman and the Mole Men is cinema.
That's right. But it is a jump. So it's a good segue because I want to talk specifically about Chris Reeve. So Sheraz, what do you think about the films? Because there's 4 that he did actually. And it goes back to the casting. I mean, here we have a guy, and it's remarkable. Because one of the things that I think casting Chris Reeve did is it said, you can cast these characters and they don't have to look like they necessarily walked off the comic book. He was skinny. And even though he did get in shape, by who? Does anybody know who trained him, by the way?
Was it Darth Vader or something?
David Prowse. That's right.
Prowse,
yeah. But even when he got in shape, he still was, he was a pretty thin guy. But, you know, he's tall, good looking guy. Juilliard, stage actor, wasn't someone that, I mean, for them to go out and find an unknown back then for something like that was kind of unheard of. Mm-hmm. Yet there was something about him that obviously Richard Donner saw and wanted him in the part. And I think the trade-off to get him was that I think the producers were like, that's great, but you better get me somebody big. And that's when he went and got Marlon Brando and Gene Hackman, you know. But
they had already cast Brando before they even cast Christopher Reeve.
Well, that's fair, but yeah, but
I think Brando and Gene Hackman before they even cast Superman.
But I think that without that cast, he wouldn't have gotten away with going to get an unknown. Is my overall point is that having them as
it's really funny the people that they throw out there, like, oh, it could have been Robert Redford, it could have been, but who are some of the names they were dropping?
Dustin Hoffman, Sylvester Stallone.
Dustin Hoffman, yeah.
I mean,
hey, how you doing there?
Yeah, I mean, Al Pacino. I mean, you name it. And you realize the brilliance of they needed to find somebody nobody had ever seen before. And unfortunately, the trade-off for Christopher Reeve was arguably it ruined the rest of his career. But the other trade-off is Christopher Reeve will never be forgotten in the history of cinema. He got a role that ensures he will be remembered forever. So it's this weird trade-off, you know?
No, you're right.
No, absolutely. Go ahead, Sheraz, please.
Speaking on some of the earlier points, I mean, it's interesting to point out that Richard Donner's Superman, he wasn't cheesy for that time. And you have to always compare it to what's happening in the comics. And you're talking about you're talking about the Silver Age. You're talking about things that are extremely campy at the time. Like the kind of stuff that was happening in the comics during the time of Richard Donner's Superman, it makes Donner's Superman look like an extremely deep and serious look at the character. And I think Zaki pointed out before that everything was handled in a serious way. The score was handled in a serious way. The directing was handled in a serious way. And Christopher Reeve took it very seriously. I mean, if you listen to some of his old interviews, he took this character extremely seriously and knew like the weight on his shoulders to perform this character. So I do think that, you know, in hindsight, when you look back, you might say, oh, it's a little cheesy compared to today's time. But for back then, this was a very serious movie. This was a serious interpretation of Superman.
And what Sheraz is saying is just as applicable to like Batman 89. You know, I mean, people say the same thing about Batman 89. Oh, it's cheesy and this and that. It's like, yeah, but you got to look at what it was at that moment and what had come before it. Even Rick, just, I mean, even Christopher Reeve being thin, he's definitely thin when you compare him to Henry Cavill, who has this amazing physique. But Christopher Reeve's Superman looked like a Kurt Swan Superman. Which was in the comics at the time, you know, and certainly in the first three movies, he's a lot bigger and buffer than he is in the fourth one, where I think he stopped caring about the fourth one.
Yeah, right.
You know, I had a kryptonite athletic shake, trimmed me down. The svelte Superman.
But, you know, but we talk about, and Sheraz alluded to this about him taking the role serious. Not alluded to it, he flat out said it, and he's absolutely correct. He did take it seriously. He approached it as a real actor would approach anything that they're doing seriously. And here's two things that he was able to pull off. First of all, the tagline for this film in terms of marketing was, and I'm going to butcher it a little bit, I should have it in front of me, I'm sorry, but something like, "You'll believe a man could fly." And that was it. And close enough anyway. So, and keep in mind, there wasn't CGI and things that we have at our fingertips today. I mean, that was all wire work. And Chris Reeve really did make you believe that man is flying. Because if the wrong person was in that role, they couldn't quite pull off the moves and the gestures and the composure. I mean, could you imagine how unbelievably awful it would have been? You know what I mean? It just wouldn't have worked. I mean, they had to sell that. And that sequence still to this day, when, you know, you see him for the first time, well, actually not the first time, but the second time, but you see him in action for the first time, and he saves Lois, one of the most iconic scenes in comic book movie history. And he comes out of the revolving door, and the guy's like, "Say, man, that's a bad outfit." He's like, "Excuse me." And he flies up. I watched that to this day. I'm like, I still believe he's flying, even now, today. That scene looks like if someone was standing there and took off flying, that's how it would be filmed and how it would look. But another thing that he did is he also, to Sheraz's larger point, is that he also made us believe that Clark Kent, I mean, let's think about it. It's the worst disguise in comic book history. Is there a worse one than Superman? He puts on glasses. That's all he does.
He-Man is worse than Superman.
Okay, fair enough. Prince Adams.
He gets tan.
Prince Adams is, that's pretty bad. Okay. Second worst.
I'm a Prince Valiant haircut.
Yeah. Second worst. Fair enough. But and Sheraz, tell me, do you agree with this? Right? Like, he made you believe that Clark Kent was a different person.
Yeah. I mean, it goes a lot with even the body posture of Christopher Reeve. I mean, he literally slouched his back when he was Clark. And when he was Superman, he would take this really almost like Greek god style, like standing pose. And it just everything. Like, again, he's not, let's say, the biggest or the most buff Superman, but just in the technique of posture, you believe it's a different guy when he's Clark and when he's Superman. And that's not even counting the acting itself when he's his characteristics and mannerisms as each character.
Absolutely. Like, I really do believe that people could get fooled by that. And quite frankly, we haven't seen that on film in that way. And we'll get to Superman Returns. Of course, Brendan and Ralph tried to sort of imitate that. No fault of his own. That's what he was directed to do. But Chris Reeve was remarkable. And look, he led us to 3 other films, and some of them were pretty bad. And I still can watch them to this day just because I can watch him, you know? So let's talk about that for a second. So so he did Superman the movie, and then in 1980 came Superman 2. Now, obviously, it could be a whole separate podcast getting the behind the scenes stuff on that, because we talk about today like the Snyder Cut and the whole Joss Whedon, Zack Snyder thing with the Justice League and whatnot. But
this was the Snyder Cut of its day.
Yes, yes, right.
Donner Cut.
The Donner Cut, right? Exactly. It was because Richard Donner, as famously, was basically kicked off the film. They brought in Richard Lester, who did Three Musketeers, just kind of a zany slapstick director, and he also did Hard Day's Night, the Beatles movie. Yeah, Hard Day's Night. Yeah, thanks.
Oh, okay.
That's right. I forgot about that, actually. Yeah, great point. So he comes in and adds this sort of like comic relief to it. He reshoots a lot of the scenes and everything. But at the time when Superman 2 came out, I'm 6 years old. I didn't know the behind the scenes drama. God, do I miss those days when we didn't know how the sausage was made. We just went to the movie.
You ain't lying.
Right. But anyway, I absolutely love Superman 2 as is. Yeah, I like watching the Donner cut. It's fun watching some of the scenes, but I still just love Superman 2, the theatrical release. Sheraz, how do you feel about that film? Did you think the sequel held up well compared to the original?
I do think the sequel held up well. I mean, I'm a person who prefers the Donner cut significantly more. But even if you take the Lester cut, the theatrical cut, I think they took Superman in an interesting way, in the sense that Superman 1 is more of like the world's interpretation of Superman and from Lois's perspective. But Superman 2 is really much a Clark perspective movie, in the sense that he's torn between himself, choosing between his destiny to be this hero for the world, the savior, and then choosing the love of his life in Lois Lane. And you see him break down. And that's the closest, I think, in 4 films where Christopher Reeve's version of Superman was almost being deconstructed and forced to choose and look at himself. And obviously he made, you could say, the wrong decision, which is pretty big for the time. I mean, people forget that this wasn't, again, it's not necessarily cheesy. He's actually making a choice that most people won't see Superman as these days. I mean, he's not perfect. People will say, oh, Chris Reeve's Superman was perfect. No, he wasn't. He went through certain struggles as well. And especially for Superman 2, that's where really the struggles happen. So in that sense, I really do appreciate where they took the character going forward.
You know, one of the most intense scenes in any Superman movie is when they're in the diner and he has given up his powers and he gets basically, pardon my language here, but he gets his ass kicked by that trucker. And that's an intense scene. And he's still, even though he's more or less powerless, he's still brave. He still is going to protect Lois, but he also at that moment realizes how bad he screwed up. And then also, I mean, you have to juxtapose his beating that he took, and then obviously the footage that he sees on the television about Zod coming in and infiltrating the White House and whatnot. But it is a very vulnerable scene. Then you see him hitchhiking, which I thought was also cool later. I think Zack Snyder did a great job. I think there was a nod to that in Man of Steel. I don't know if that was intentional, but to me, I pretend like it is because I love that kind of stuff. And then obviously when he makes it to the Fortress of Solitude and he confronts his father.
Yeah. Can I jump in real quick? Because I have a huge problem with that entire scene. I feel like just because he's lost his powers, does that mean he can't defend himself? And I understand why they did it in the movie. They had to show that, you know, he can't rely on that. But it just felt very like he just got whipped. Right. And I mean, come on, dude. Like you're still a big guy. You're still like, you still have some sense of hopefully trying to, like, you know, fend off this guy. This guy was a truck driver, but he wasn't like this brawler.
Well, you know, Justin, I think the answer to that could be in the fact that, unlike, for example, the post-crisis Superman who came into his powers gradually, this is a Clark who has never known anything other than being super. So it doesn't even occur to him that this is something that could happen. Like, it does, like, for him, the notion of giving up his powers, he's probably externalizing it in terms of, heat vision and flying, but like just the act of being invulnerable is something he takes for granted.
Exactly.
Yeah,
gotcha.
I definitely agree there. I mean, I think the reason they did that is to really show almost like his humility in a sense, because again, like as Zaki said, the second he landed on Earth, he was already lifting the car for Jonathan Kent. He doesn't know any other life, and you can make a case that he was just over reliant on it. So the time, as soon as it went away, he truly felt like what it means to be human, and he doesn't know what it means to be human. And that was the moment where he knew, because he never had to rely on actually fighting someone or actually using, let's say, his core strength. He always had his powers. So this was a moment where he got put down, and maybe he had to be put down, because if he wasn't put down, if he was fighting, he fought back and he got a few punches in, I think it would take away from the character arc that was being built for Clark in this film.
Absolutely. I
didn't want him to mop the floor with the guy, but I felt like showing just some kind of like him at least trying. I think he's not a wimp. Like, Clark Kent's not a wimp, but I understand what you're saying. And again, it was all artistry, and it was all to paint a larger picture. It just kind of sits with me as I overanalyze everything. So I'm like, well, why didn't he just stand up a little bit? He still could have got beat, you know? Yeah. And in the scene of him seeing his blood is super powerful.
Like maybe have him beat up after getting ganged up by trucker and his friends, Rocky and his buddies, so that they're the sheer numbers kind of.
Yeah.
Well,
but that's we're looking back on 40 years or whatever.
He does go back at the end of the movie with godlike powers and throw that guy into a pinball machine. He could have shown a little restraint in that.
His mind. That's Superman.
Cue Henry Cavill having a beer poured on his head and just leaving and then demolishing an 18-wheeler. But anyway, listen, I do too. It's great. We'll get to that in a moment. It's a great scene. But I love Superman 2. Superman 3. We're just going to jump to that film real quick because
we're not going to talk about the cellophane Superman shoe.
Oh, that's fine. You want to talk about the listen, the whole thing with Zod and Non and Ursa was, all that stuff was great. I mean, some of the special effects didn't age that well, obviously, but hey, let me ask you guys this. So I'm going to go off the rails here a little bit. So the end of Superman 2, Sheraz, I'm going to pose this question to you. Because there's the debate, and we're going to reference Man of Steel here again, jumping ahead of myself. But the Zod scene, obviously, the infamous scene where Superman kills Zod at the end of Man of Steel. And people say, oh, he wouldn't do that. I say, hell, he wouldn't. He did it in Superman 2. And people say, no, he did not. Where do you stand on that? Did Superman, what is the fate of the 3 Kryptonians at the end of Superman 2, in your opinion, sir?
Well, it's funny, actually, because I've had many of those kind of debates also, whether it's Twitter or personal life. But it's funny because people say, "Oh, why did Superman kill Zod?" And when you look back at Superman 2, you can make a case that Christopher Reeve Superman was just as savage. I mean, he smiled while he was like crushing his hand, and it was just complete overconfidence on Christopher Reeve's part. And it's like it's 2 different ways. Like one guy is smiling while he's breaking the guy, throws him away, and the other guy is like crying after he kills Zod. So I think people overanalyze too much when it comes to Man of Steel. But going back to Superman 2, I think that you can make a case that he did die. I think one of the cuts might have shown that they put him back in the Phantom Zone. I'm not sure.
They get taken away by the Arctic Patrol.
Okay. So that might have been the lesser cut, right? I think that would have
that was the TV version.
Yeah, that was the ABC TV version. You're right. Yeah.
But I think most versions, now if you see it on Blu-ray, it just ends with him being thrown into the abyss. Yeah,
based on what's in the movie, they are 100% dead. Like if you just look at the theatrical,
even Lois, Lois is in on it. She's like, I'm gonna start killing people.
You're a real
too.
pain in the neck,
like,
and you're dead.
Yeah,
yeah. And to Justin's point about Reeve being the big blue Boy Scout, like Sheraz said, he crushes Zod's hand to powder, and the John Williams theme is blasting while he does it.
Well, in the 80s, I think we had this. We had a whole different like consumption of violence and heroics. It was like, yeah,
get him, Superman.
That's great. And listen, at the end of the day, that Richard Lester theatrical cut is canon. All right, so that's where it steps. Man. Okay, so Superman 2. All right, so then there's a movie that happens after Superman 2, guys, and one could say this is when the franchise starts to go downhill. Zaki and I will stand here and defend the Superman 3, but they obviously brought in one of the hottest comics of the time, and one of my favorites still to this day is Richard Pryor. So Shiraz.
Good old Gus.
Oh, good old Gus. So Shiraz, when you think of Superman 3, sir, what do you think? When did you see it? How do you feel about it? How did it impact you? What do you think about it today?
Yeah, so we had the VHS of Superman 3 in our house, surprisingly. I don't know why we had it, but we had it. And, I have to say, as a kid, maybe I was able to stomach it, but I just do not like this film. I think, for me, it's the worst Superman film. Worse than Superman 4, actually. I just have a hard time digesting it. Yesterday I YouTubed the scene of the evil Superman fighting, the internal struggle. I think that scene wasn't that bad, actually, but the overall movie, I have a very hard time with it. I mean, it's weird. It's like kind of history repeats itself. I mean, this was the Batman Forever of the Superman franchise, where they really doubled down on the campiness of Superman 2. So they took whatever the zaniness of Superman 2 and they said, let's just, put all our chips in that. And that was Superman 3. And I just think it didn't work out. Definitely for me, I just do not like that film.
Well, Shiraz, you're right. And that film was Richard Lester Unleashed, because there was no Richard Donner film he was working. There was no framework of that. It was just his film. He directed Superman 3. I'm 100%. Yeah, right? Richard Lester?
Yeah. I remember a rumor or reading something, and I probably read it in IMDb or something, so who knows if it's true, that Tony Danza was almost Superman in this movie because Reeve was pissed. Reeve was pissed about what happened with Richard Donner. And so there was this whole thing, about, oh, he's not coming back. And so he came back with a little bit of like script, doctoring. I don't know if that's true, but can you imagine Tony Danza as
a fun side note is that he walked when they wouldn't let him change the name from Clark to Tony. That's a Zaki gets it.
I get it.
He always has to play Tony. All right, wow, we got off on Tony Danza. Anyway,
Tony,
that's a deep cut.
That's a deep cut. All right,
I got it.
All right, Zaki, help me out here, man. We got to show a little love for Superman 3, dude.
Well, okay,
Yeah.
so I should say, objectively, Superman 3 is a terrible movie. I'm not going to defend it.
It's awful.
However, that being said, I was in India visiting my grandparents, and I saw Superman 3 in the theater. It was the first movie I ever saw in the theater. So I am just constitutionally unable to be objective about it because I have such love for that experience of being that 5-year-old watching Superman on the big screen. So it's very hard for me to disentangle that. I will say, I mean, what Sheraz said about Batman Forever, I think is very apt. If Batman Forever cast Jim Carrey as Larry, Bruce's IT guy, who we spend 30% of screen time just following while there's a separate Batman story happening, It's so bizarre to watch. It's so bizarre to just be like, oh, and here's like 5 minutes of Richard Pryor getting, Gavin O'Hurley shit-faced and like trying to hack into his computer, and so you're like, what is happening here? Lois is having an adventure in Bermuda or wherever the hell she is, which we won't even see.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so bizarre, but Christopher Reeve is on point. I think this is probably his best performance in the role in terms of he has figured out what works. Like his take on Superman is awesome anyway, but his take on Clark, specifically Smallville Clark, where he's with Lana, and you see like this right here is the most real Clark we have. It's the Clark who doesn't have to be stumbling and fumbling, and he's just Clark. He's just a good guy. Yeah. But he's human, right? He's not overtly goofy, but he's a regular guy, and this is who he is most comfortable being. I love the nuance that Reeve is able to layer, and you can tell when he's the evil Superman in the junkyard fight, that is the most fun Chris Reeve has in any of the 4 movies. He is just tearing up, and he's having a blast doing that. So,
I love that scene, by the way. I think that's a fun scene.
It's
Superman
a quintessential comic book movie scene in the best way possible.
And I think he looked the best aesthetically as Superman than he did in any of the other films as well.
I totally agree. Yeah, his hair looked good, everything. Yeah.
So
he was wearing a wig in this one.
Oh, come on.
He was not wearing a wig in this one. He was wearing a wig in parts of the second one. Yeah.
Oh, the second one. Okay.
So, the first time in my life, and by the way, I saw Superman 3 with my sister, double feature Return of the Jedi. I dare anybody. That's a mic drop right there. But anyway, so I remember when Superman opened up, when Clark chokes bad Superman, and then he opens up his shirt and his bright color S is exposed. The John Williams score kicks in. He flies off, all heroic and whatnot. Everybody in the theater cheered and clapped. That's the first time I'd ever experienced that. And I will always love Superman 3 because of that moment. Obviously, it's a trash juice movie, but I don't care.
Trash Juice was my band back in high school.
Zaki's Trash Juice. All right.
They were a
All right,
grunge band.
so then there was one more film after this. Hey, Sheraz, what the heck went wrong with Superman 4: The Quest for Peace? Now, you just said a moment ago that you think
what didn't go wrong?
You think it's better than Superman 3, but it did ultimately kill the franchise and completely bombed at the box office. What do you think went wrong with that film?
So I think first a few things went wrong, but just to be positive, I'll first speak to why I do like it more than 3. I think it's because Christopher Reeve, I think if I'm not mistaken, he was a little more involved creatively with this film process. And, while I think the ideas were really poorly executed, I do feel like the overall idea, what they're trying to gun for with the nuclear idea, like there was something they're trying to do, and obviously they didn't reach it, but I do appreciate that. And there's two moments. It's the speech he does at the UN when he's walking and all the world leaders are like clapping when he walks in the middle. I just love that shot. And then the ending sequence of him speaking to the world. And I know it wasn't intended at the time, but it ended up being his final speech as the character. I just really love that speech. But everything else, I think the budget was just shot on that film. It was really bad. The special effects looked worse than the previous films by far. So, and I think the whole nuclear man gimmick, I think that was a really bad gimmick that hurt the film. Yeah. But I think they are good. There are some points you can take out of this movie that you're like, you know what? There was something there where I feel like Superman 3, I can't say that something was there in the same way. So that's just my perspective. But yeah, this was the nail in the coffin. But I think the nail was already being hammered in with Superman 3. So this is just the final nail. So I think it was already on the snowball hill down. This is just the ending of it.
Yeah. I think one of the main problems with maybe even the last two is they failed to use the classic Superman villains in these movies. And I think they spent all this time creating these stupid like Nuclear Man and they don't bring in the characters that, you would love to see. I think that would give you even more reverence for these movies, even when they're so terrible. Well, at least it had, Brainiac in it, or at least it had, Parasite or something. Like you could see that there's elements of these characters in there. I was like, why didn't they just use the actual character? Why use Nuclear Man? Why use Gus? Like why use all these corporate tycoons? Like give us what we want in these movies. And they didn't. And it really, it suffers. They're like, especially 3 and I feel like I'm kind of with you, Sheraz, on 4. 4 I actually enjoyed more because it felt more like and I don't know if it was because I remember the marketing as a kid, because this was the first one I saw in the theater. Like they were really pumping this movie up. I remember they were like commercials for Superman 7-Eleven cups or Burger King or whatever the heck it was. So like I felt really excited for this one. And I think that's where some of my love for it. So kind of where, Zaki, you're like, Superman 3, there's like a sentimental love for it. But overall, this one, man, when you go back and watch it and you do, like you mentioned, the special effects, I think they used recycled Supergirl like footage for some of the flying. And it's just so terrible. And it actually starts off pretty good. Like, hey, he's in the world of nuclear weapons. And there's that little kid's letter and then the weird like Superman museum with the hair. Like, how does that even work? But I don't know. But you know what? Let me tell you, I'm going to say something. I actually don't mind so much Lenny. I kind of like Lenny. He was like the 1980s.
How can you not like him?
It's the 1980s sidekick character, and I kind of liked him. Man. I don't know. Any Lenny fans out there?
He's a direct reflection of the times, I would say. And of course, I was born way after it, but you could just tell like that character is just rooted in the time of the movie.
Yeah.
What's funny is John Cryer has talked in interviews about how he was super excited because everyone involved, nobody set out to just, release this turd. Everybody had the best of intentions. They really thought they were going to sort of revive the franchise. And Chris Reeve obviously was involved in shaping the story. And he really, unfortunately, I think the whole experience was heartbreaking for Christopher Reeve because he was made a lot of assurances. And of course, this is Canon Pictures, Golden Globus. So don't trust those guys because they make terrible movies. But the budget was sliced by like $30 million. And I read an interview with John Cryer where he talked about bumping into Christopher Reeve maybe a few weeks or so before the movie was going to come out. And he was like, hey, I'm really excited to see the movie. And Christopher Reeve's just kind of like, yeah, don't be. Like it's pretty bad. Like he's like, John Cryer described just seeing the heartbreak on Christopher Reeve's face. And I think part of that also is because Christopher Reeve saw Superman 4 as kind of his last chance at relevance, because Superman 4 basically killed his time as an above the line star.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, and he was relatively young. Christopher Reeve, let's see, 1987, he would have been like 34,
Right.
Yeah.
That's gotta be rough,
Yeah, for sure.
Bummer. The Dude of Steel.
Yeah, the Dude of Steel. I just walked off the set of Charles in Charge.
Boy, are you going to get it?
I barked into tears. Yeah. But you know, it's sad, and it's particularly sad when you think what happened to Chris years later. We lost an amazing human being and an amazing humanitarian, and you know, and I know this is a horrible segue, but I want to talk about it for just a second. When he died, there was a great, I guess you would call it a meme. I don't know, that was going around at the time. It was I don't know if the word meme had been coined yet, but essentially it was Superman coming off a wheelchair and something about him, flying forever, from this point on. And it was really beautiful. And I think about, losing him, what a loss, because he was, at least to me, when I think about a superhero, even though Batman's my favorite character, when I think about a superhero, my mind doesn't see Christian Bale's Dark Knight or Michael Keaton's Batman or whatever. I see Chris Reeve standing there as Superman, and that will always be the image that comes in my head. And for that, I love the guy forever for it, because it's such a part of the fabric of who I am as a person. And Chris Reeve has a lot to do with that, for better or worse, right? But he just is. And I know he means a lot to all you guys as well. So much so that, his legacy was unmatched. And I think the original sin, because Superman went dark on film for a while. I mean, obviously we got Smallville, we had an interesting run in comics, but
well, speaking of Smallville, like Christopher Reeve got to play Dr. Swan on there.
He did. Absolutely. That was cool.
Yeah.
But we didn't see Superman again on the big screen until 2006, and Bryan Singer's Superman Returns. And I promise I'm not going to get off on this, but I was a part of that casting process. And the only reason it's relevant to the conversation, I'm going to take 30 seconds to say this, is that at the time that I was reading for it back in between 02 and 05 or 04, not once were we told anything that this was going to be like a love letter to Donner. In fact, we were reading off original scripts. And when the news came out that they had cast Brandon Routh, it was Latino Review that actually released that information. I'll never forget, because my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, was like, "Babe, I hate to do this to you, but come here." And she had his headshot pulled up on the computer. I was like, "No," because that was like my way of, I looked down, I had like 10 missed calls from my agent right at the same time. But what was interesting, especially for me, kind of going through that experience, is because I went in, it was a weird thing. I went in it going, man, I was like in the last 100 people they were looking at, and then. Also, I'm a huge Superman fan, and so it was a weird experience for me. But one of the first things that jumped out was, oh my gosh, this is just a big love letter to Richard Donner's Superman. And they cast Brandon Routh to basically be Chris Reeve. And I think that was the film's original sin. Sheraz, what did you think of Superman Returns, man? And what's your thoughts on it? And by the way, I'll just say this. I don't hate that film, and I actually like it better now than I did then. Maybe some of my bitterness has worn off, but also the things I liked have grown on me. But it does have its problems. So Sheraz, what do you think, man? What do you think of Brandon Routh Superman, the movie, everything?
So, similar to how Justin, Zaki, and yourself, like, you guys had your first theatrical experience with Superman, whether it was Superman 2, 3, 4, whatever the case might be. Well, my first theatrical experience with Superman was Superman Returns. And I think, was it 5th grade? Might have been 5th grade. 6th grade. Yeah. So I was in 6th grade when Superman Returns came out. So that was my first time ever seeing the hero. And at this point, I'm already a Superman fanboy. So I have like stacks of comics in my house. So I was already obsessed with the character. So this is my first time. So you could imagine my excitement. I was just pumped to go to the theater and see Superman. And in that respect, I'll always love the film, because that was my first experience seeing it. And we had like a little family event. Like, I think 3-4 of my families, we all came together, like 20 of us, and we booked like tickets in the theater. So it was like a big moment for the family together to see Superman. So as you guys said before, this was my theatrical experience with the character. So in that sense, I completely love Superman Returns. But then obviously the more you grow up and you look back at it, I do think that it was flawed in a sense. I think it got a little too preachy at times. I don't know if that's the right word, but it just, and I do get the love letter aspect of it. In that sense, it's a good linchpin, a good closing to the Chris Reeve arc, if you count it as canon to a story. Let's say you remove Superman 3 and 4 and you say Superman 1, Superman 2, Superman Returns that happen in one canon. I think that could make sense. So in that sense, I do appreciate what the film did. But overall, I don't really look back at the film as like I'm not the kind of guy who's gonna pop in the Blu-ray and watch it. It's kind of like part of my past, but it's not something that I actively think about that this was a great achievement for Superman in cinema.
Yeah. Do you think Bryan Singer deserved a sequel?
At the time, if you asked sixth grade Sheraz, I would say yes. But now, in hindsight, I would think it was better to move on to something new.
Yeah, and Bryan Singer is on record saying he really wanted his Superman follow-up to be the Wrath of Khan of Superman. I always would, still to this day, was curious to know what that would have been like. And, we can also talk about Tim Burton's Nick Cage project and everything else. I mean, some projects didn't get off the ground, some didn't get their sequel. But Superman was there brewing, but they didn't quite get this one right to relaunch. Zaki, do you disagree with that, or you think that it was a great film and Bryan Singer deserved a sequel?
Well, I definitely don't think it was a good film. My memory of Superman Returns is just the anticipation. And at the time, Warner Brothers had put out a whole bunch of Superman TV shows and things on DVD, to tie in with that release. So like Superboy and Lois and Clark and all these things were, whatever the latest season was, they put it out on DVD, and they were packed with tickets to Superman Returns. And so I bought all those. I'm like, man, I'm going to be watching Superman Returns like 5 times. So I got all the tickets. And then I went opening night, and I was like, all right, well, probably not going to watch this one again, And the truth of it is I haven't watched it the whole way through since the theater, that one night in the theater. I think there are parts of the movie that are beautiful to look at. I think Bryan Singer knows his way around a shot and how to frame a truly artistic frame. But I think that my sense is he loved the character of Superman less than he loved just the Richard Donner film, if that makes sense. Like I don't feel like he really got Superman. And it was weird because for as much as we say it's a love letter to the Richard Donner movie, it's tonally so dour, there's none of the sprightliness and none of the joy of the Richard Donner movie. So I just feel like I don't know what his in was, but it's very hard for me to have Superman Returns sit alongside those earlier films because just tonally it doesn't feel the same. And I feel bad for Brandon Routh because I think he deserved a better movie. I think he is really good. I think he's terrific. But we don't really get a sense of his Clark, and his Superman is spending most of the time moping and kind of spying on probably the most miscast Lois Lane in history. I mean, I no disrespect
100.
to Kate Bosworth as an actress, she just was not a good choice for Lois Lane in this movie.
I agree with that.
Yeah,
Justin, what do you think of Superman Returns? Did they just screw up by not casting me? Is that what happened? Anybody?
I think
That's the original sin.
Knowing what I know now, I 100% agree.
Bad joke.
Like, man, that would have been just a dumpster fire of awesome. No, I remember being really excited for this because it was post Batman Begins and like, oh right, these characters are coming out, and I was just really pumped to have this like new new iteration of the DC heroes on screen. And I remember Brandon Routh and Christian Bale both like presented an award at like some MTV thing, and I was like, oh dang, this is the seeds of the future. And being naive and a lot younger then, I just thought, hey, they're going to build towards something. And once you see Superman Returns, you're like, oh, this is definitely not even in the same realm. Even though they mention like Gotham City and the newsroom, there's like a little pop of it. Either it's on the screen or they mention it by name. But it was just, I'm trying to think like the things that I can pull. I want to pull some good stuff out of Superman Returns. The plane rescue, good scene. I actually liked, oh man, who played Jimmy Olsen? Sam Huntington. I think he was a fun Jimmy Olsen, and I liked the scene with him and Clark in like, I get that's supposed to be Bibbo from the comics.
And that's Jack Larson from the TV.
They're in the bar.
Jack Larson. So yeah, and I like that part.
And by the way, Brandon Routh Superman is drinking a Budweiser, and then Henry Cavill's drinking a Budweiser in Man of Steel. So I guess Budweiser's his beer choice.
Superman has his drink of choice.
Yeah, it's American. It's all either way, it's not going to affect him. Much like a normal man. but maybe those are the two things that I liked about it. It was definitely a total bummer, man. And like you, Zaki, I actually I saw a couple extra times because I did have one of those tickets because I bought the Adventures of Superman.
Yeah, right.
I got another ticket.
Yeah, see?
But I took my grandma to see it though, and she's deaf. And what she explained was that was her favorite time in a movie theater ever. I think with like maybe the visuals and the way the sound felt in the room. That's what she said. That was her favorite time ever at a movie.
Cool story.
That's neat.
You know, and so I think that's one of the things that I take away from it. Like, man, my grandma experienced this really amazing time. Like we expect so much from it because we're fans, but you know,
she got
sometimes
visually rich.
She got something visually rich, and even though she can't hear, she felt the power in the movie. And I remember being affected by when he dies. It made no sense. Not when he dies, when he hit the earth. I thought that was a really great setup shot. Like it looked like a beautiful shot when he hit the ground. But then I kept asking the question, wait, how did the kryptonite affect? The kryptonite situation was really weird in that whole movie.
It's pretty fluid.
Wait, it hurts him? It doesn't hurt him? What? I don't know what's going on here. But
here's the one thing about Superman Returns that has bugged me forever. Okay. The plane rescue, which we all acknowledge is one of the greatest sequences in the film. But here's the thing. So the plane is crashing. He sets it down gently in the middle of this baseball diamond, and then he flies away.
Yeah.
Take the plane with you.
He doesn't have time for that, man. He had to go back to spying on Lois, man.
He just saddled the city of Metropolis with a massive bill to get this plane out of there. This is why Superman is a dick.
He not even that. He took it to Dodger Stadium, man. That's where that thing crashed.
There you go.
He's like, I'm going to go on the whole other side of the world.
It's their fault now, not my fault.
Yeah. You know, and this is going to sound really weird considering what we know now, but I actually liked Kevin Spacey as Lex.
Yeah, I agree.
For me, I thought he did a good job. I mean, there was a lot of the cornball from the 80s films kind of held over to it, but I liked Kitty Kowalski, obviously, because I'm Kowalski. And so I liked, what was her? Oh my gosh, what's the actress's name again? I just love Parker Posey. I'm a big, I thought that she made a really good, I like when Lex has his female, assistant or love interest / whatever. I just, his conscience that he never listens to. I liked her. And, in the end, I do wish we got a sequel just because I would like to see where was this going to go. You know, they teased about always putting out a longer release with a longer intro. Because remember, they've always said that they always teased
Singer.
They always teased that Singer had a extended cut, traveling in the ship from Krypton all the way, back to Earth, and because it would have been really nice to kind of see.
They do
what
have
the heck
footage.
happened.
It's on the DVD or something of his visit to Krypton.
Oh, is it on there?
Yeah.
Because I feel like even his return is it's still, why did he left to go check out Krypton? Yeah, it's not there. Okay, I'm coming back. I know there was a subplot, and but it was you needed that extra information to kind of make the story makes sense. Similar to, BVS. Yeah. Man, you really needed that extra information about Superman because I can see where it seems well, why is he acting this way? Once you get all that information, you're I get what's going on. I get why they're going at it. And so it needed that. And unfortunately, I think the person who suffered the most was, like you said, Brendan Routh. He's just a good dude, and he's great as the Adam.
I do
like
as well,
him
and I think he's a good dude, and I think he was great in the film. And I'll say this: I have a lot of issues with that movie as well. I would like to have seen Bryan Singer give us a sequel, but I do want to point out a couple of positives. I like the cast as well. I'm not really crazy about Kevin Spacey's Luthor, to be honest with you. I like Gene Hackman's much better. I like Parker Posey. I had an opportunity to actually see her on Broadway in a dress rehearsal for a play called Taller Than a Dwarf with Matthew Broderick years and years ago. I was front row. It was such a treat, and she was just electric. I was 5 feet from her. I was God, she's so great. And her Dairy Queen monologue and Waiting for Guffman is also comedy gold. But yeah, she's great in that film. And I like the cast. I don't actually mind Lois at all. But Brandon Routh's speech to his son, which the son thing is a podcast in itself, why they made that decision.
Yeah.
But that monologue at the end was beautiful. It was really beautiful. And I think that was a great way to end the movie. And I think Routh deserves a lot of credit for that. And one of my favorite scenes, I was going through like my top 5 favorite scenes in Superman films, which is a very hard thing to do, by the way. And 2 are from Chris Reeve's films, or actually 3 are, then 1 from Man of Steel, 1 from Returns. And one of the Return scenes is when after he kind of like creepy stalks Lois, when he's eavesdropping. But hey, you know what? Who wouldn't have done that? I guess really, because at least he was doing it respectful in the sense that they were having just a conversation in the kitchen, as long as she was in the shower or anything creepy like that. But still. But when he flies off in the score, and then you hear Marlon Brando's voice in the background, and then he's up in space and he's just kind of chilling and he's meditating. And I'm like, wow, that's a beautiful shot and just a cool moment. And then when he hears the chaos and then he hones in and focuses and just takes off like a rocket, that is a kick-ass Superman moment. And those are just 2 positive things, but I understand why they didn't make a sequel. But it is unfortunate because Brandon Routh was a good Superman. However, with that said, we got a better Superman. We traded a better Superman. Yep. And we're going to segue now to Man of Steel, which is a film that I just want to start off by saying this. When I saw it, I wanted to throw my boot at the screen. I hated it. I didn't hate it, but I was just angry about it. I was viscerally like, what was that garbage? And I was expecting something entirely different. I didn't like it at all. I sent Bill a message through Batman on Film going, I don't know if I can write a review for this. I guess it was in 2013. And I got to see it again.
Yeah.
I saw it again. I sat there in the theater. I was like, what was my problem with this movie? I love it. I love this movie. Right. And it was weird. I had a weird initial reaction to it. And then when I saw it the second time, I did a 180. And one of the things I appreciated most about seeing it the second time was the fact that I love that it's sort of a Zack Snyder, Chris Nolan hybrid. Because I want to go on the record right now that I think Zack Snyder is he is an artist, and he makes beautiful art. Even films of his I don't like, they're still beautiful art. I may not necessarily like the choices made as a movie, but he's an artist. And Man of Steel is I don't know. It's tied with Watchmen. I love Watchmen. Love it. It's just so great.
Yeah.
And I just love Man of Steel. And I think Henry Cavill is such an underrated Superman and I say underrated meaning this because I just don't think he's had his due since Man of Steel, and I want it. I want him to have it, and we'll get to more of that in a second. But I just want to get that on the record. So let's talk about Henry Cavill. Let's talk about Man of Steel. Let's talk about this new era of Superman. And let's start with one of the biggest Zack Snyder fans that I know, Sheraz. So Sheraz, tell us about Man of Steel for you, man.
All right, man. When it comes to Man of Steel, like I could spend hours just talking about this film. I absolutely love Man of Steel. I adore this movie. I mean, this was, for everything Superman Returns wasn't, this was. And I remember the day I went to see this movie, I remember, it was my 2013. So it was my sophomore year of college. So I was just so excited for this. I remember I was talking about it every single day with my friends, my family, that Man of Steel. And when I saw it, I saw it in IMAX also, my first showing. My mind was literally blown. And, I think it's a product of the kind of comics that I've been reading. But for me, this was the Superman that I was reading, in a sense. Like, one of my favorite stories is Superman Earth 1. And I love Superman Birthright. It's like my single favorite Superman story. And this was that Superman in many ways. And I felt very connected to the Superman. They really, maybe not humanized him, but they put him in our world. And I think I just love what Zack Snyder's idea was, to put this Superman, who's obviously in many ways, he's like a utopian figure, some might say, but to put him in our lens and to change the focus just a little bit, it just gives you so many beautiful moments. And the flight scene in particular, I mean, that's like, that scene just makes me emotional even watching it. That's my absolute favorite Superman moment. For me, that is the Superman saving Lois from the helicopter in Superman 1. That's that scene for me. So it's just such an important film to me. I watch it, I would say, at least once a month it's on for me, and I'm watching it. And it's an important film for me. It's like the Superman film,
Right.
I think it's the quintessential Superman film. I think retelling the origin story in this light, I mean, even killing Zod, I think that was such a powerful moment. I mean, I remember sitting in the theater and when Henry Cavill like lets that scream out after killing Zod.
Mhm.
I mean, I think it's powerful. And I know I'm rambling a little bit, but also the way they show his relationship with his mother, I think that's very powerful.
Mhm.
And it's not really explored that much, this motherly figure. I mean, I know in some films, obviously, the superhero's parents are either dead or whatever the case might be, but the relationship between Clark and his mother, whether it's the scenes of the past or the scenes when he's like punching Zod and saying, "You think you can threaten my mother?" That's just
Mhm.
I mean, what kid wouldn't do that, you know, if they were Superman and someone came after their mom? So, I mean, that film just resonates with me on like every level.
That scene's awesome, man. When he's just pounding Zod, I love that, and he's just going on about his mom. It's good stuff. Justin, go ahead, man.
Yeah, that was the first. I love this movie so much. You mentioned the stuff with the mom. Some of my favorite parts are when his mom visits him in the school and tries to get him to focus.
He goes in the closet, dude. Yes.
Yeah, and she's like tells him to make the world smaller. Like, there's so many like really great character parts of this movie, and I think people let the destruction overtake, you know, and I can see that critique. It doesn't bug me because I'm like, it's a gigantic superhero movie where he's fighting Zod. Like, what do you think's going to happen? Like, anyways, like the entire like relationship with his mom and just the stuff, like even how his, you know, the flashbacks with his dad, which again, having Kevin Costner and Russell Crowe, both Robin Hoods, play your dad, is super awesome. I love all the stuff with like, yeah, Robin Hood has to play your dad if you're Superman. So my favorite though is Jor-El. I think Russell Crowe as Jor-El is awesome. As much as the Krypton stuff in Superman 78 like bored me, this stuff, man, I want to watch an entire like movie based on that. Just Jor-El jumping onto flying like beasts, and that stuff was so interesting and so cool. And Snyder like just did a great job capturing all of that. And I hope that Krypton show coming out has a similar vibe, because I saw a trailer for that. Just a side note.
It sure looks like
awesome.
it, doesn't it?
Pretty awesome.
It seems like they're trying to do the same aesthetic. Yeah.
And Justin,
yeah, it feels like it. But yeah, check it out.
Justin,
it
just real fast.
awesome.
I'm so sorry. I didn't actually hear anything you said after you said Marlon Brando bores you. What did you say after that? I'm kidding.
No, I didn't say Marlon Brando bores me. I said, oh, okay. I said.
I know, but it's all Brando though. It's all one and the same to me.
Yeah. Some of the counts. I don't know. Anyways, but yeah, this entire film was the Superman that I've been wanting to see, because that's the Superman I've been reading for 20 years. Like the Reeves Superman was stuck. Was the Superman that wasn't even being published anymore when they even came out. Like the stuff that Cavill was doing was a little more of a nuanced Superman. And I don't think he was dark. I just think he was who he was, and he grew up in this world. He listened to grunge music. Apparently, that was a joke, man. It came right out.
I love that
when he comes out of the
Chris
Cornell.
Dude,
Chris Cornell. Yeah. Maybe it's more of Zack Snyder's thing. I don't know, but. Yeah. So, and I think Cavill was such a great Superman, and I'm glad that he finally got the role, because I know he was like campaigning hard to be Superman. He was almost Superman in Returns, or in one of those movies. I don't know if it was Returns or if it was when
it was. I think J.J. Abrams, the one his project didn't fly. He was for that as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it was the right time for him.
He was the right age when he got it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love it, and I love the scene where Lois is interviewing him, and he has the handcuffs on. He stands up, and then they pop off. That was one of the coolest parts of the trailer. And I know I'm going all over the place because I'm trying to get all my thoughts in so we can like get to the other stuff. But when he's being escorted down like the corridor with the military, and he's got the handcuffs on in that trailer, you're like, what the heck is going on? Like, it was such a great trailer moment, and that's all I really want to say. Like, Man of Steel, such a great movie. If you don't like it, suck it.
Hey, the scene where you're talking about in terms of them, Lois and Superman are talking and he's handcuffed. I actually watched that today. It's just one of my favorites. And I know I'm saying that a lot, but it's all true. They are literally my favorites. And I also like how she starts to name him, and she's like, S, no, make no mistake. It's an S here, that kind of thing. She's like, you're super. And then he they get interrupted.
He's got that sparkle in his eye too.
And that's just it. Like,
and
I'm sorry, I'm going to reference this because it's relevant to the conversation. The hardest thing when I was auditioning for him was Clark. No, listen, hear me out. Clark was approachable.
No,
I got it. And I think that was my best part of my stuff. And probably most people that did audition for him. Being Superman, how are you Superman? What do you do? Like, how do you stand? How do you talk? And in your head, you're going, how do I do this without imitating Chris Reeve? And then you watch Henry Cavill, you're like, that's how you do it. That's how you do it. You just are. And Henry Cavill just is. He's got it. He's got that magic. Zaki, is it fair to say that some of the compliments that these two gentlemen are giving to the film that I also agree with in terms of it's Superman through the lens of the world that we live in? Was some of that, Nolan has been on record saying that he really envisioned Man of Steel, he and Zach both, as sort of the Batman Begins for Superman. Do you think is it fair to like kind of maybe tie that in a little bit and say that was what they were going for, was very similar to what Nolan did with Batman Begins?
I think so. I mean, it's important to recognize that chronologically, what Nolan did with Batman Begins was he wanted to do for Batman what Richard Donner did for Superman. And he said as much, right? In terms of when you look at Batman Begins, the way they cast it with these very recognizable, credible names that grounded, a story that treated it seriously. It played it straight. So then you say, okay, now we want to do that again for Superman. You can understand the instinct being, well, if we're going to do it, let's do it a little bit different, because why? Like the Richard Donner movie exists and it's there. It did what it needed to do at that time. So you say, well, how can we mix things up a little bit? And so that's the framework in which Man of Steel really works is it says, okay, let's press down on this area of the story and let's focus on this. And so you don't have a Superman who is fully formed out the gate. I mean, the Man of Steel is a story of a Superman discovering himself from beginning to end, and I'm somebody, I really enjoyed Man of Steel. I don't think it's perfect. I have some issues with it, which I can get into, but I think overall, I think it's a very good movie. It was one of my favorite movies of the year it was released. But the problems that people had with it are, I mean, to be honest, Rick, I mean, this is not all that different from the conversations we've been having about episode 8 with various people on the internet. The critique is always, well, it's not that other thing that I like.
Right.
And my response to that is always, well, that other thing is there. And if that's what you want, it's there for you. This property is bigger than your preference. And that's not to say your preference is wrong, but how many different ways have we seen Superman's origin interpreted? Even before Man of Steel, you had 10 seasons of Smallville. You had the animated series. You had like 5 or 6 different comic book origins after Man of Steel, the John Byrne comic, that's the character. The character's elastic, and he adapts to every new era. And, hearing Sheraz talk about being, a sophomore in college and seeing it and interfacing with it a certain way, well, for a whole generation, Henry Cavill is their Superman, and they're not wrong for that. And I really blanch at people who say, well, it should always be like the thing that I like.
And Sheraz, you put out a tweet very specifically making that reference to Luke's Last Jedi and Henry Cavill Superman. Did you not?
Yeah. So, right away when Last Jedi, I mean, I'm a big Last Jedi fan. I don't know about you guys, but I know it's not a Star Wars podcast, but I do love that film. And
it's always a Star Wars podcast, man. Just FYI.
We get it in there. Did you hear my Return of the Jedi Superman 3 double feature thing? Really? That was intentional, sir.
Yeah. On Twitter, you see the hashtag "Not My Luke" start to float around and "Not My Thor."
Oh my god!
And I was thinking that, wait a minute, this just happened in 2013 and in 2016 with Man of Steel and BVS, where it was the "Not My Superman." And I just remember when people kept telling me, like, again, I was born way after Chris Reeve. Now that we just spent an hour talking about his films, and I absolutely love them. But again, like as Zaki said, this is my Superman in the sense where the Superman that I read growing up, and I started reading comics in the late 90s, and that's right after Death of Superman. And Superman was a very different character post-crisis and pre-crisis. And I'm really much a post-crisis reader. And when you say Man of Steel, it's very much a reflection of this time compared to the other times. So when people are telling me on the internet, again, it's the internet, you can't do anything about it. When you're getting told that what you like, that's not my Superman. Well, of course it's not your Superman. You didn't grow up. You grew up in a different time, and that was your Superman. But that doesn't mean my Superman is wrong or your Superman is wrong. And the same thing with Luke,
Exactly.
you know?
Mm-hmm.
And Luke is different because it's actually one character length going from the beginning to end. So even more so with Luke, I would say it doesn't make any sense because you have to take the character. The character can never be static. I think the worst thing you can have for a character is to be static. And you survive 80 years. Superman's now, this is his 80th anniversary. You don't survive 80 years if you're the same thing you were in 1938. That's not how life works. That's not how characters work. And that goes to Luke Skywalker. That goes to any character. That goes to Batman. You cannot stay one way. You have to constantly evolve. You have to constantly change your perspective depending on the time, depending on the era, the economics, the politics. Everything goes into the era of what you're watching. So I would say a lot of the criticism on that level make no sense to me. And so what do you guys think about that?
No, I think that's perfectly stated. I mean, I don't know how else I could phrase it. I'll put it to you like this. I love Man of Steel almost as much as I love Superman the movie. Man of Steel is my second favorite Superman movie by far. And I love Superman 2, by the way, so that speaks volumes. And they are both my Superman. How do you like that, Internet? Chris Reeve and Henry Cavill are both my Superman. And I'm okay with that. I like that. And that's what, you know, I tweeted about this the other day. Obviously, my favorite comic book character is Batman. Look how versatile Batman is. You can have the warehouse scene in BVS, which is savage. You can have Lego Batman. You can have Batman Scooby-Doo. You can have, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's so versatile. He's so versatile. And quite frankly, we've come to accept that, I think, by virtue of like the Tim Burton, Joel Schumacher films. Suddenly everybody can accept Batman being different, but nobody else. It's nonsense. Superman is a versatile character in the same way that Batman is. And by versatile, it doesn't mean get away from who he is at his core, right? It's just about a characterization, mannerisms, maybe certain decisions they would make, or you know, God forbid, a facial expression. Okay, so he showed a little anger. Good. He's pissed off. He's pissed off because Lex just showed him a bunch of pictures of his mother tied up. Right. Who else wouldn't be? You know, which is one of my favorite moments in BVS, by the way. So yeah, absolutely. You're 100% correct, man. Justin, come on. What do you think of that?
No, I totally agree. I would say that Cavill is my favorite Superman, and I like every choice that he's made with what he's been given. You know, if we want to get into BVS, I will defend that Superman's portrayal in that movie till the end. I don't like that he died. I'll say that my critiques of the movie, just so you know where I'm coming from, I don't think his death was earned yet. I don't think the audience was that invested with him yet, but I think he played it well. I think the scene was good. I don't like how Doomsday looked, and I don't like Lex Luthor. Let me get those things out of the way. I will say that I understand his motivations in that movie. Like, everyone's like, he wasn't smiling, he wasn't doing all this stuff. Well, the whole world was starting to turn on him. Like, at first he was celebrated, he has this statue, like, then all of a sudden, like, oh, people are blaming you for these things. And it's like, how do you reconcile that when you're trying to help, but now everyone want to put government sanctions on you, they want to do all these things where they want to control you, and then all he's thinking is like, maybe the best thing for me to do is go away. Like, everyone's had that. How relatable is that? You're not having a good day. Like, Superman's allowed to not have a good day. And maybe people didn't want to see that in a film, but I thought that it was a good take. And it was interesting because in the end, you find out you guys do need him. And then that's the only reason where I think the death pays off at sea. You guys drove him away, and then he died. And that sucks. You know, like you end up with this, oh, we did need him. And then I just don't think that part was, again, earned with this iteration of the character yet. Maybe it needed to be like Superman.
That's my beef with it. That's exactly it. Look, and I'll say this is that what I wish they would have done, it's too late now, so we can't undo it. But I wish that Henry
just fly around the world.
Yeah, we'll just change time. Yeah, by the way, I ignored that part of Superman the movie. I'm glad nobody brought that up. Let's just turn back time. I'll just make the world go reverse. But anyway, that I wanted Henry Cavill to have a proper sequel, give Ben Affleck a solo Batman film and then do that movie, and it would have been much better in my personal humble opinion. Zaki, transitioning from BVS S to Justice, or I'm sorry, from Man of Steel to BVS. What are your thoughts? I know when BVS came out, Zaki, you weren't a big fan. How do you feel about it now?
I'm still not a huge fan of it. The conversation around this movie has coarsened to such a degree that I don't even like talking about it, because it's like people like lose the ability to be to have nuance in their discussion. You know what I mean? To be able to say, well, I think this part works, I don't think this part does as much. I echo a lot of what Justin said, where I think Henry Cavill, I don't put any of the blame for what I consider some of the faults in that movie on him. Certainly. I just feel like it's telling that story too early in this mythology. I think BVS is a story you really needed to earn, you need to work up to. And where Superman is at the end of Man of Steel, I feel like we needed at least one movie of him being the hero that everyone looks up to, rather than having this quick montage at the beginning of BVS where we're like, oh, and he's, there's a statue of him and people are trying to figure him out. I get the instinct, which, Snyder said this up top, right? Oh, we're doing like a first contact story, and how would the world really react to Superman? Fair enough. I don't question that. I think, the problem is that we as the audience need to know that the rest of the world is wrong. And I think for as powerful as that opening sequence in BVS is, where we see Bruce Wayne sort of weaving in and out of the finale of Man of Steel, I think it's a great sequence. I would have liked that to come after one movie where we've seen Superman being a hero. And then we're like, let's go back in time and now look at how Bruce Wayne has been perceiving this. And, because the problem is that I think we're just going to be inclined to be on Batman's side, and I said at the time, I was like, the movie felt like Warner Brothers sort of putting a thumb on the scale, and saying Batman is better than Superman. And that to me, and I don't know that that's entirely true now with the benefit of however many months it's been, but that's what it felt like watching. It felt to me like Warner Brothers saying, yeah, Batman's actually better. That said, I agree with Justin that they should not have killed Superman this early. However, I think the death scene itself is handled really well. I think Cavill really sells it. I love that this is my world, you are my world. I mean, my God, and by the way, this is something we haven't really discussed. What the Man of Steel universe, the DC universe, what they've done is exactly what Smallville did, where they made Lois Superman's partner. She's not his trophy. She's not his prize, who he's going to like put one over on, and she's going to see the real me. And no, she's been a partner in this identity.
Yeah, too. So Sheraz, I know that BVS is a very special film to you as well, sir. So what are your overall thoughts?
So let me just let me just answer one thing that Zaki said before when it comes to Batman v Superman, and again, like the timing of it and having a film in the middle, maybe. From my understanding, and I had the benefit of speaking to Zach a few times about this film, but just from my perspective, he really wanted to do a trilogy, and not necessarily a Superman trilogy, but he wanted to do a DC trilogy where Superman was that thread line going through it, that this character arc of Superman, which is supposed to be a 3-film character arc between Man of Steel, Batman vs Superman, and Justice League, that there's some kind of a payoff where all these heroes are being bounced off of this character, whether he's dead or he's alive. His thread line goes through very strong. But again, going back to Batman v Superman, this again is a very special film to me. In many ways, this is kind of like Zack Snyder's magnum opus of what he can do with DC characters. Because in the sense, like we said before, Man of Steel is very much a joint creative process between Christopher Nolan, who was very much involved creatively with it, and Zack Snyder. Whereas Batman v Superman is kind of like Zack Snyder unleashed in a way, where he's really putting everything he has into the film when it comes to the many layers that you can dissect. And I've written many articles about it, many think pieces about it. And one that, not necessarily a plug, but just want to quickly share it. I wrote an article called The Ultimate Immigrant Story, Zack Snyder Superman. And this article basically spawned my Zack.
That's a great piece, by the way, Sheraz. It's fantastic.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Well, that was the piece that Zack Snyder ended up sharing, and we connected over this piece particularly. And for those who haven't read it, it's basically making a parallel between the Muslim American experience in post 9/11 America to Superman and what he's going through in Batman v Superman, and particularly in the comparisons between Bruce Wayne being this stand-in character, maybe a strawman character for like someone, an American post 9/11 looking for something to blame, and then going at Superman when Zod is really, really the one to blame. And then when you see how there's my favorite shot of the film, and maybe my favorite shot of Superman ever, is Superman flying down, and you see all these signs in front of the Capitol building, and all these protesters are protesting Superman. And you see things like Superman is unchristian or illegal alien. We don't want you here. And I mean, you can make the parallels right away to how people treat immigrants today, whether it be dreamers, whatever the case might be. And that leads to a second point. Just last week on Comic Book Debate, we published a dreamer. A dreamer came to me and wanted to anonymously publish something of how she felt watching Batman v Superman as a dreamer now in post-Trump America. And I'm actually very proud of publishing that piece. And if you haven't read it, I definitely recommend reading that piece. And it gives you a completely different perspective. Like, this is a person who's a dreamer who came to America with their family under whatever circumstances, and they have a microscope on their head. And you can make that case with Superman. There's layers of it underneath of how Superman's being treated. And I feel like Batman v Superman, unlike other Superman, he very much is relatable to minorities in a way. I mean, again, he's a white man superhero, so there's only a level it can go. But I've noticed so many minorities reached out to me and saying that, you really nailed it on the head. This Superman connects with me more than any other Superman. So in that sense, I think the film has so much power to it. And again, Batman v Superman is like a once-in-a-lifetime movie. Like, we're never going to get a movie like this again. I mean, this was supposed to be your popcorn movie. We all come see Batman v Superman 5 for 2 hours. And what Zack Snyder did was he kind of turned it on its head, and we didn't get anything like that. We got a very much political movie about what Superman means to not just America, but to the world. And again, there's some creative choices we can discuss. Again, should Superman have died this movie or not? And I mean, that's completely fair. I mean, again, I think maybe Zaki said, or Justin, that a lot of the nuance in conversation around this film has gone a little bit to the wayside. And it's gotten a little toxic on both sides, really. Whether when I say something about I love Batman vs Superman, I'll get people, trolls 3-4, saying that, why do you love this film? And on the flip side, if you say you don't like this film, you're going to get 3-4 trolls saying, how dare you not like this film? So again, I think some of the nuance went away. But in another way, it's healthy because it's been 2 years almost since Batman v Superman, and it's still a daily conversation. You go on Twitter and people are still talking about it to the point where it's almost exhausting. But then again, it speaks to the testament of this movie, how divisive it is.
Exhausting is the word.
But there's plenty to love about the film at the same time for me. And Henry Cavill, despite some of the choices that I don't necessarily agree with in terms of the interpretation or the execution, maybe is a better way to phrase it, he was still great in the part. And even though I don't think that the extended cut fundamentally changes the picture in any way necessarily, it does make his character more powerful. And for that, I always appreciate it. And hey, I'll take more Cavill on screen anytime. Anyway, right now, listen, we've got we're going to probably have to wrap up on time here, guys. I know we have Justice League, so let's just kind of brushly talk about that for just a second in terms of, look, I know that with Justice League that Superman, it was kind of his resurrection film and whatnot. And there was obviously a lot of behind the scenes stuff that I don't even want to revisit because it was not a very fun year to report on a lot of those things. But essentially what we ended up getting was this kind of Zack Snyder, Joss Whedon hybrid of a film. And, I think the movie does suffer for that in a lot of ways. And I think that CGI upper lip stuff is just, it's bad. And he deserved better than that. But there's still some great Superman moments in Justice League. And I just want to say that I just hope that regardless of, we all have different opinions. I don't think Justice League is a bad movie at all. I very much enjoy it, but I just feel like that all those characters deserve better, especially Henry Cavill Superman, especially Batman. But I think that if anything, if they do continue with him, which I hope they do, and the only reason I'm hesitant to say that they aren't is just because you look at Brandon Routh, he got one chance, and now we're 3 movies in, and is this all working in terms of mainstream audiences? Well, you know what? You're going to go recast Henry. That's going to be very tricky, and people don't not like him as Superman. So I hope that I am wrong about that, and they do make another film, and I want to see more of what some of the stuff we saw in Justice League. Does anybody disagree that one of the coolest Henry Cavill Superman moments is finally seeing him rip his shirt at the end, right? That's just such a great Superman moment, and to see him do it, so cool. And then I love the post-credit race scene. I just think that scene is freaking awesome. Sheraz, just any kind of overall thoughts on
with Justice League, it's one of those weird things where my mindset changes the more I think about it. And personally speaking, I do think this is the weakest of the Zack Snyder trilogy. And I'm putting quotations because it's no longer that much of a trilogy with how Justice League turned out. But I do think it's the weakest. And I don't know if we're going to do a ranking at the end of our Superman movies, so I'll save that for later. But it has good moments of Superman. But I think overall, I wish it was executed a little better. Some of it seems a little jarring, like the reshoots. Again, like when you look at Man of Steel, look at Batman v Superman, there's a certain characterization of Cavill's Superman. And it speaks actually how Cavill is as an actor. I mean, as an actor, he is more he's a little bit more soft-spoken. He's very stoic many times in his interviews. And I feel like that's kind of what Zack Snyder wanted to play off of him in Man of Steel and Batman v Superman, where in Justice League, I mean, of course, you can tell he's having a blast playing the character under Joss Whedon's reshoots, but I think it's just a little too jarring for me, like that switch. And of course, there are some great moments, but I'm not 100% sold on Justice League anymore, personally.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. And look, we can talk about it all day long. It was a bad year for BOF reporting on that movie. I knew way too much. I knew way more about all that than I needed to know or wanted to know. At the end of the day, but if anything, if we get a Henry Cavill sequel out of all this, I will be the first person to say I don't like being wrong. I'm an obnoxious, opinionated person, and I know that. But excuse me,
yep.
Justin's supposed to say,
I said, yep.
You're my friend. But anyway. I'm kidding, but I would love to be wrong about this, and I said I'll throw a party if they do a proper sequel and build on some of the things that we saw in BVS that I did like, because I do like that movie and there's things about it I love. I do have issues with it, but still, he is not one of them. And Man of Steel is phenomenal. And let's just see more of Cavill. Zaki, do you have any disagreements with that?
I am a fan of the Justice League movie. I'm an unabashed defender, which is weird. Like, I've taken fire on all sides because I gave BVS I would say a pretty negative review when it came out, and then I gave Justice League a very positive review when it came out. And I think I acknowledge both have problems and both have good aspects. So, I'm not that far apart on either of these. But I said in my review of Justice League that it won me over early. And by early, I mean in the first 30 seconds, because the first shot is these kids talking to Superman, and they're looking up to him, and he's smiling, and he's talking to them. And I'm like, this is who Superman is. And, one thing I talk about a lot when it comes to movies like this and movies like Star Wars is how kids perceive it. And part of that is because I'm not the primary audience anymore. I view a lot of this through the lens of my children, and I'm like, Superman is a character who means a lot to me, and he should always be somebody aspirational. He should always be somebody modeling kindness and just decency. And I love how Justice League from the jump said this is who Superman is. And by the way, when I say that, I don't mean that as like a repudiation of what came before, but it's very clearly putting down its tent poles that this is what we're aspiring towards. And so for me, I didn't find it jarring as much as I felt like the resurrection of Superman kind of allowed them a brake lever, if you will. And so it allows for him to maybe have a new perspective on things.
Yeah, that's cool. I like also that opening scene because it's showing Superman in the B versus S timeline as the hero that some of us may have wished we saw a little bit more of in B versus S. And then you also think about the beginning of B versus S. You see them sort of retroactively address one of the criticisms of Man of Steel, which is maybe too much destruction in the city. So all that stuff is really well done. And you look at it from 30,000 feet, you're like, okay, it all makes sense. All right. So, yeah. So, okay, guys. So, listen, this has been a great show. I do want to do this real fast. I want to do some plugs. And then, as far as our top films, Sheraz says something about a ranking. I can't resist a ranking. Maybe but let me, there's a lot of films. Let's, I don't know. Let's do our top Superman films. Sheraz, what are yours?
All right. So, I got number 1, I have Man of Steel. At 2, I have Superman 78. 3, I have Batman v Superman. Then Superman 2, then Justice League, then Superman Returns, then Superman 3, and then Superman 4, and then finally Superman 3.
Okay, Zaki.
Oh boy, I'm gonna say Superman 78, then Man of Steel, then Justice League.
Then
the rest.
Yeah, that's good. The rest are That's how kind of I feel about it. Then the rest of them. All right. So, Justin, what about you?
I'm just gonna say my favorite is Man of Steel.
Listen,
and leave it at that.
Mine is I go back and forth with Man of Steel and Superman the movie. I think Man of Steel is probably overall a better Superman movie at the end of the day, but it's just part of it is just nostalgia. And what I love about Superman the movie, it's kind of like 3 movies in one, which is a really cool thing. You're like this Kryptonian, and it's almost Shakespearean, and then it's like you're in Smallville, small town, that feel. And then he's in New York as the hero. It's just really, I like that a lot. It's very layered, but Man of Steel. And then, I would say Superman 2. And then if I have to rank all those, I mean, I'll put Superman 3 for, my own sentimental reasons, but obviously I know it's a crap movie, but then I would say BVS, Justice League, and then the rest. So, okay, listen, guys, this was a great discussion. Man, I really appreciate it. I've been wanting to do this show forever. Let's wrap this thing up, and there's more Superman stuff coming on Batman on film, and this was just the first of many things ahead. So, Sheraz, we appreciate you coming on very much, sir. And why don't you give us a plug, man? What do you got going on?
Yeah. So, quick plug. Myself and my brother and my team, we're doing a fundraiser. We're joining the Black Panther Challenge. If you guys aren't aware of that, it's to take schools in the neighborhood, particularly schools from lower socioeconomic areas, and to take them on a trip with their classmates. So we're doing that. I mean, I'm a lifelong New Yorker, so we're taking a school in the Bronx. We're raising money. We already have about $450 raised. And Rick gave a very generous donation as well. So we really appreciate that. And you can find the link on Comic Book Debate Twitter. You can see it on my own Twitter at Sheraz Farooqi. And so you can definitely share the link, donate what you can. It really goes a lot. It really goes a lot for these kids. They haven't had a trip for a very long time. So this would be very nice for them to see Black Panther with their classmates.
Absolutely love this. So please, if you have the means, donate. Even if you can donate a couple of dollars, please do it. All right, Zaki Hasan, sir.
I want to put out a plug for 3 commentary tracks that I've done that are relevant to the conversation we had. For the Movie Film Podcast with my partner Brian Hall, we have done commentaries for Superman 78, Superman 4, and also Man of Steel. And if you enjoyed this conversation, this might be presumptuous, but I think you may enjoy what myself and Brian have to say about those 3 films as well, and that is the Movie Film Podcast.
I love all your stuff. You and Brian make a great team, by the way. Absolutely. Justin.
Thank you so much.
Hey. All right. So, just check out the other shows that I do. Let'sGoCast.com. You can check out the Let's Go podcast and Let's Go Comic Show and the new show we have called Start Today. So those are all available.
Awesome. I'm Rick Shew. Follow me on Twitter, Shew Rick. There's a lot of exciting things on the horizon for Batman on film, including more satellite shows that have to do with Superman. There's obviously going to be some Star Wars stuff that comes up. Talked to a guy yesterday, in fact, a very reliable source and becoming a very good friend, in fact. And I can't say he or she's name or how I know them, but I will say that they saw the Solo trailer and saw a couple of scenes from the film and just said, dude, get ready. It is sick. And those are his words or her words, right? Whatever. But anyway, so we will do we'll definitely do a podcast on the Solo trailer when that comes out. Follow me on Twitter, like I said. Thank you guys so much for supporting Batman on Film. Thank you for supporting the satellite shows. And announcer Rachel will take us out.
Hey now! You've been listening to the Batman on Film podcast, a proud member and the sponsor of the Batman Podcast Network, BatmanPodcastNetwork.com. You can listen to the BOF podcast on iTunes, YouTube, Stitcher, Google Play Music, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, TuneIn, and wherever good podcasts like this one can be found. Want to advertise on the BOF podcast? Go to advertisecast.com/the Batman on Film Con podcast. Follow Jet on Twitter at Batman on Film and on BOF's Facebook fan page at facebook.com/jet.batmanonfilm. Email Jet via jet@batman-on-film.com. Follow Rick on Twitter at ShewRick and on Facebook at facebook.com/BOF-Shew. For Jet, Rick, Justin, and Ryan, I'm announcer Rachel. Thanks for listening.